These guys are a family. These guys are brothers. They've never stopped being that. They never turn away from each other. It's all for one and one for all. We don't see that in music. We don't see that in bands. I mean, think of any band you could mention. The Beatles themselves came apart. Van Halen, they couldn't hang in there for each other. Def Leppard, they set the standard. They showed the world how to be a band.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, conversations with authors, musicians, and insiders revealing the stories behind classic rock's greatest songs, albums, and artists. If you're enjoying the show and you'd like to support it, you can sign up for the Booked on Rock Backstage Pass on Patreon for just $5 a month. You'll get every episode commercial free and before everyone else. Just use the link in the show notes or visit bookedonrock.com. Now on to our guest. Scott Robinson is the author of Def Leppard, Every Album, Every Song. It's part of Sonicbond's on-track series of books. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Well, I appreciate it. I've looked forward to this. It's going to be a blast.
Yeah, I think this is the very first episode I've done on Def Leppard. I can't believe it. I've been doing the show for, 4 or 5 years. So I'm glad we're able to talk Def Lepp. When did you become a fan?
To be honest, it took me a bit. I didn't jump right on board in the 80s. I was pretty young, but I actually had become a critic right out of college, which meant I got sent to concerts and I got all these albums that the record companies would send to the paper. And each of us critics, there were cubby holes, and they'd stuff the cubby holes full of whatever they thought each of us would be interested in. And I missed Pyromania. I was too late to the party for Pyromania, but Hysteria rolls around, and I'm just this kid out of college, and there it is in my inbox. And so I took Hysteria home, and I taped it, and I thought, it's like, oh my God, where has this been? So I put it on cassette, and the thing is, to just be efficient with my time when I was that age, I would put albums on cassette and I would play them in my car. And my little baby boy would be in a car seat behind me. And when he started headbanging, I knew he liked whatever I had on. And so he just decided that Def Leppard was what he wanted on all the time. And so we played it over and over and over. And that's how I became a fan.
Wow, what a great story. And what inspired you to take on the challenge of writing a song-by-song guide to Def Leppard's entire catalog?
Well, now, the song-by-song guide, as you know, is done by Sonicbond, and they've got the on-track series, and that's what this book is part of. Just to be, honest with you, I'm in love with the series. As a critic for many, many years now, I'm always looking for resources that help fill in the blanks for me when I'm writing about a band or writing about an artist or an album or whatever. And I have found the Sonicbond series, the on-track series from Sonicbond, to be just invaluable. I probably have 24 of them. And so when it turned out that they were, looking for fresh writers, it was like, hey, I'm on this. I'm all over it. By all means. And I talked to my editor, and Def Leppard was what we landed on pretty quickly.
That's great. I am a huge fan as well. I've had many Sonicbond authors on the podcast over the years. It really is a great series for somebody who's a longtime fan, but also somebody looking to maybe introduce themselves. They've just become a fan of a band. And it's a great gateway into that band history.
It really is. When I read those books, it's like watching a documentary. It's like you have the whole life of a band compressed into a space you can digest. And I love that about it. It's like the Kansas book. I loved the book they did on Kansas because it goes all the way back to those days when they were living on $1 a day for food at McDonald's, all the way to today. And you can go every stage of a band's journey. And when you let the music lead you, you don't miss anything. And I love that about the series.
So let's get to your book. You explain how Def Leppard came out of the new wave of British heavy metal, yet they always seem to stand apart from many of their peers. What made them different from bands like Iron Maiden or Saxon or Diamond Head from the beginning?
I hope I'm not controversial when I say this, but from my reading of their history and from my knowledge of that era, I'm going to say, because they loved Maiden, They loved Priest. They loved Saxon. They loved Thin Lizzy. They loved all those bands that were specifically two-guitar bands. And from the inception, they were that. They were a two-guitar band. But they never did the same style of play. All the bands we just named, they're famous for playing, two guitarists playing in harmony. And my controversial opinion here is that when it was Pete Willis and Steve Clark at first, the first two guitars for Def Leppard, and then Phil Collen and Steve Clark, the fact is, no guitarist wants to play harmony with Steve Clark. He's not like any other player. You get Pete Willis in there, and Pete Willis, he's pretty much a precision player, very melodic. And Steve Clark was just kind of unbridled. He was a little bit wild. And it was the same with Phil Collen. And so they would, instead of doing the twin guitar thing that all of their idols did, they decided to go back and forth. Now, that was a great idea because it took them out of the mold of a rhythm guitarist and a lead guitarist, and then next song we'll swap and do it the other way around, like a lot of bands did, to we're each going to have a lead or more in the song. And that meant they had to change up the songs more to make space for the extra lead or leads. And so that made them better songwriters, it made them better musicians, and it made them sound more unique. Now, it's in all fairness, yes, sometimes they would play at the same time. The intro to Bringin On the Heartbreak, they do play in harmony, but almost never. They did the volley thing back and forth, which made them more musically interesting, but it allowed Phil Collen to be the technician and allowed Steve Clark to be sloppy. He was very Jimmy Page in his playing, but that worked because he was wild, he was expressive, he was emotional, and those two different styles playing off each other just sound great. So from day one, I think they committed to that, and that's why they're different.
One thing I love about the chapter on that 1979 EP is how DIY that whole project was. There are 3 songs, Ride Into the Sun, Get Your Rocks Off, and then the near 8-minute track, The Overture. Joe Elliott's father loaned the band the money. Joe and his mother assembled the sleeves by hand, and then the band sold the records themselves. How important was that entrepreneurial spirit to Def Leppard's eventual success?
My impression is that set the whole pattern, the whole template for Leppard, because from day one, they were their own industry, and they were, they weren't about climbing a ladder. They were about connecting as directly as they could, and that was the fastest way to connect. And it worked out great because they developed the skills you need in order to connect in the way that they did. They'd play anywhere. And they pushed that EP on everybody, and they very cleverly put it in the right hands at the right time. But they weren't going to let any red tape or any protocol or any ladder slow them down. And I think they remained that way throughout their career. They were just an entrepreneurial band of guys.
One of the most fascinating stories is that EP impressed Cliff Bernstein so much he actually left Mercury Records to become Def Leppard's manager. What did he hear in those 3 songs that convinced him this band was special?
I'm hoping he heard the same thing I hear when I play it. If you listen to those 3 songs, you've got to Ride Into the Sun is just anthem big time. It's like it just this hits you in the face. Start of the set, bam, there they are. All the way to Overture, which is borderline progressive. And, you've got this range in just 3 simple songs. I think the running time is less than 15, 16 minutes if you mash them all up. In that amount of space, you see this band can do whatever it wants. And I think that those songs were very well chosen. Now, they never really revisited seriously the Overture form. They never really got into long form or progressive again. But it showed what they were capable of, and it showed that they had real range as songwriters and performers. I think that's what he heard. I think he heard this is a band that can be shaped and molded in 100 different ways if they just open their minds to the possibilities, which is exactly what happened.
And then the debut studio album, On Through the Night, released in 1980, features Wasted, Hello America, and Rock Brigade. One of the most fascinating stories is the backlash the band received at the 1980 Reading Festival, where some fans accused them of selling out because they toured America. Talk about that, and why did that perception develop so quickly?
That always baffled me. I listen to Hello America, and I don't get any trace of, abandoning Britain for the States at all. I do see it as Leppard kind of cultivating this, we're here to party. We're here to rock you. We're here for you. And they weren't worried about boundaries. I think that when I look at the history of rock, Britain created so many forms. Britain created heavy metal and America adopted it. Britain created progressive rock and America adopted the new wave of British heavy metal. That was Britain again. And I think that there's a certain sense of, especially among the young guys that were at that festival, there's a sense of ownership. There's a sense of, it's a proprietary thing. This is ours. And Leppard didn't think twice about boundaries or borders. They just went out and did their thing. I don't blame them. They should have, that they did the right thing. And if you've read about them, then you know that they lit up here faster than they lit up there. It was a good long while before they really caught fire in their own homeland, whereas they caught fire immediately in America. Well, that's just how the chips fell. But the fact is, I don't think they ever really cared about borders or boundaries. And I honestly think, they didn't deserve to be treated that way.
Yeah, they toured with AC/DC that year, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. And that worked out really well for obvious reasons. So they ended up meeting Mutt Lange.
That's what we're going to get to now, 1981's High and Dry, which introduces Mutt, who would become one of the most important figures in Def Leppard's career. It includes Let It Go, Bringin On the Heartbreak, which hit number 61 on Billboard. Bringin On the Heartbreak, let's talk about the work that was put in on that song alone and why Mutt felt it should get that much work. He believed it would be a huge hit. He
did, and he was right. It took 2 tries to get it out there as a big hit. The first time they released it, it didn't fly high. The second time it did because they were better known. But the fact is, Mutt Lange always had an ear that bent around the genre. He was famous for being able to hear things that the bands he was working with couldn't hear in themselves. And I think Mutt kind of foresaw the power ballad. I think that Journey likes to run around saying, "Oh, we did it. Open Arms was the first true rock power ballad." Well, no, it wasn't. And I think Mutt could hear it way ahead of everybody else because he had access to that incredible harmonic sense that Leppard naturally had, those marvelous voices that they could do. Most of the band can sing magnificently. And he just said, okay, we have the makings of something here. And that was the power ballad. And there weren't any power ballads back then. He was the first to hear that. And he heard it in Leppard. Well, 3 cheers, because, look what happened throughout the 80s on MTV. Leppard was there first, and they were there first because of Mutt Lange. And then comes Pyromania from 1983. Def Leppard become global stars. Photograph, Rock of Ages, Foolin', Too Late for Love, all huge singles. Photograph was an unfinished leftover from the High and Dry sessions. Can you share what Joe Elliott said about the poster that inspired that song? It's a great story because it kind of set the pattern for a lot of Joe's inspirations for lyrics for songs about women. He was living in an apartment in a kind of a dump, a basement apartment, and there was a hole in the wall that was being covered up by a poster, which makes you think of Shawshank Redemption. But that poster was a poster of Marilyn Monroe. And of course, Marilyn Monroe has inspired a lot of great songs, just ask Elton. And in this particular case, it had Joe going back to Mutt and saying, how cool would it be to do a song about a woman you just really, really want and you just can't have? Now, that's not exactly an original idea, but Mutt says, why? Why can't you have her? And Joe says, well, because she's dead, which is pretty original. Who says that? Right. But it turned out to be the kind of the template of a lot of songs that Joe would end up writing. He would find some impossible scenario where there's a love denied. And there are dozens of Leppard songs about frustrated love, most of which came from Joe. This was probably the template for those, let's come up with something that would just be so frustrating you can't even endure it, and powy, an absolute gold mine of music. That song, to this day, cover bands play that song. It's just a marvelous song. It is. And the deep tracks on that album, that's what makes that album so great. You have Stage Fright. Yes. Billy's Got a Gun. They just round out that entire album. So that's what makes that
such a great album. That's what makes the debate interesting between Pyromania and Hysteria. I mean, if you had to choose one or the other, which one would you go with?
If I had to choose between the two, I would go with Hysteria, just because it went farther in terms of sonic innovation and production innovation. It was just a more groundbreaking accomplishment. I mean, who records an entire album just with a Rockman, you know? Well, certainly not a metal band. They were the first metal band to do the entire album with a Rockman. But I have to say that with both Pyromania and Hysteria, why you've got so many great deep cuts is because Mutt Lange won't let a loser track through. It was the same with, he did Foreigner's album 4 before he did Pyromania. He did AC/DC. And there are no loser tracks on any of those albums. He would not let a bad track through. So, of course, there are deep cuts. Mutt Lange specializes in digging for deep cuts.
Yes, I would say the same about the Cars, Heartbeat City. He produced that.
Yes,
Same
a great
thing.
example. Yes.
And one of the biggest turning points during the recording of Pyromania was that Pete Willis left the band and Phil Collins stepped in. How difficult was that transition? And how much did Phil ultimately shape the finished album?
Now, that's a great question. The fact is that it was both a good thing and a bad thing. It was a bad thing because Pete really had paid his dues. And Pete Willis really was a fine, fine guitarist. Go back and look at any of his work on those first two albums and half of the third album. Great, great stuff. He was a good player, and he played well off Steve Clark. He set the template for the two guitar back and forth. But he had troubles on the road. He had troubles, keeping his head in the show. And they had called Colin once before he left the band, and they had said, we're shaky with Pete. Can you learn our entire set in a day? And Colin did. He went out. They were going to play some festival, and he learned the set in one day, but then they called him back and said, no, looks like Pete's going to go on, but thank you. But at that point, they knew Phil Collin, and they knew he was a trooper. And so when Pete was having trouble getting through Pyromania, Mutt went to Joe, and Mutt said, we got to do something, Joe. And so Joe took it upon himself, and he did the deed, and he said, nah, we got to let you go, Pete. And called Phil, and Phil was instantly on board and got handed more than his share of solos. Steve gave a couple up. And of course, he delivered a marvelous, marvelous performance on that album. And you had Leppard complete once and for all. And he sounded great with Steve Clark. The two of them, they became known as the Terror Twins, and rightly so.
And Pete's problem was substance abuse, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
Scott Robinson is the author of Def Leppard, Every Album, Every Song. It is part of Sonicbond's On Track series. You devote an entire interim chapter to December 31st, 1984, because it's impossible to tell Def Leppard's story without it. Looking back, just how close did the band come to ending after Rick Allen's car accident New Year's Eve, where he lost his arm?
I don't think anyone in the band actually thought seriously about the band ending, but the band was on very rocky ground with its handlers and keepers, because Alan came in and he said, I'm hanging in there. And he immediately got to work on a way he could continue to play drums. And he started designing the famous kit that allowed him to play with 2 feet in one hand. And the band stuck with him without even blinking. I mean, if you go back and read the quotes and the stories of how they stuck with him, it's just astonishing. But everyone around him wasn't so sure, including Mutt. And Mutt was eventually sold because Rick just stuck with it. And he brought them all in and said, here, and he played, I think it was Zeppelin's When the Levee Breaks. And they were just blown away. And so Mutt became the apostle to the Gentiles, convinced the management, convinced the label, yes, Rick can do this. Even so, they covered their bets because the first outing happened not long after the band rehearsed. They were, ramping up for Hysteria, and they played at a festival, and they had a standby drummer just in case. And they brought Rick out, and the crowd went nuts. And from that moment forward, Rick knew not only was the band behind him, not only was Mutt and their management behind him, the label, but the fans were with him too. And
never been done before.
it was a done
so
deal
the fact
from
that
that
they're not
point.
giving
Yeah.
up on this guy is amazing.
Yep.
That's what makes this album my favorite, not just because I love the songs on it, but the story itself. I mean, if you're going to make a movie on Def Leppard, you can make a story just on this comeback story. It is absolutely
You really could.
hard to even imagine the idea that you're going to continue with your drummer who just lost his arm. And the story about his brother bringing in the transistor radio into the hospital room, and then Rick starts tapping the pads on the bottom of the bed to keep him from falling down, sliding down. It was those pads that they put up. And that's how it all started. I mean, and then it creates a whole new sound. It becomes the Def Leppard sound because he plays with a lot more space in between the beats, and it just worked in their favor.
It really did. It worked in two ways. Musically, you're exactly right, because it was the creation of a new style of drumming for Leppard. And they had already tackled this before with Mutt, because they would, before Rick had his accident, they would be doing sound check in some big arena, and Rick would do his and the band would get annoyed with him. It's like, don't do that. Will you please stop doing that? And Mutt, talked to Joe about it, because that's what Mutt would do when there was a problem. And he said, you can't be doing that. That doesn't sound good in an arena. And he says, you guys want to be great and play arenas, write songs that sound great in arenas, and that Pour Some Sugar on Me kind of where Rick eventually went with his style, which was, not flashy and not flamboyant, but just 4 on the floor in the groove, which is what he could do with that kit. That became the Leppard sound, and it so worked in arenas. It was, as you say, they had found their new sound, and they found it for that reason. The other thing is this. I think that because of what happened to Rick, there was a kind of a connection that happened among them that became the All for One and One for All that still thrives here more than 3 decades later, almost 4 decades later. You have that dynamic of, we're not letting go of each other for nothing. Only death can separate us. And I think it started with Rick Allen's accident.
Yeah, this album took a while to make. The story, again, with the amazing stories here. Jim Steinman, right, from Meatloaf fame, was initially the producer, and that didn't work out. So they bring Mutt Lange back, because I think Mutt was he was working on the Heartbeat City album with the Cars. I think that's why he couldn't commit to it, but then he came back.
Exactly right. Yeah, and Steinman's problem was he was all vibe. And Leppard had learned on the previous album, working with Mutt, vibe is fine, but if you're going to be a great player, be a great player, be great players. And so they learned precision from Mutt. They learned how to be the best at what they did. I mean, those albums are musically perfect. And Pyromania was where they crafted that sound. Mutt would have them do take after take after take. He would not settle for less than their very, very best. Whereas Jim Steinman, his whole thing would be, well, you found the groove. All right, cool. Let's move on. And they were going, no, we're not even close. We can do way better. So they were doing the Mutt Lange thing at him and saying, we can be far better than this. Why aren't you pushing us? And that's why Jim eventually washed out.
Yeah, people may assume or think that the album opened with a bang, like Pour Some Sugar on Me was the opening single and it just took off, but it didn't. It was, I think, Women was the first single.
Yep. Women was the first
it
single.
Did okay.
It did okay. It didn't do great. Pour Some Sugar on Me is the story there is just amazing.
The strip bar story.
And there's two. Well, there are 2 parts to that story. The first part is why they did the song at all. The fact is they had wrapped the album. They had all the songs they needed. They had an album's worth of songs. They didn't really need another song. But Mutt, being Mutt, something stuck in him and said, no, we're not done. Now, he had no reason to say that because they had enough music to fill the album, and they had more than enough hit singles already. They had achieved their goal of having an album that was just nothing but killer tracks. They had that. But Mutt wouldn't let it go. And he had the label and he had the management saying, we're done. Will you turn it over to us? He was like, nah, not quite there. So what happens is he walks into the studio one day And it's Leppard's habit to have acoustic guitar laying around everywhere. So see if you feel something in your, sticking in there, you want to just play, then by all means sit down and play it. And that's what Joe did. He was sitting in the kitchen of the studio and he was just noodling. Pour some sugar on me. And he was doing a country tune. And he had a country vibe and all that. Mutt walks in and Mutt's like, what is that? And he says, well, that's all I've got. It's just a little chorus. And that's all he had. And Mutt says, oh my God, this is it. This is it. And so he and Joe, just the two of them, they rough up a demo of it. And when the other guys come back the next day or whenever, they play it for him and says, oh, come on, you want to do another song? Guys, trust me, this will be the one. And lo and behold, that's what happened. Pour Some Sugar on Me ended up being the song that wrapped the album. But then they don't release it as a single. As you say, they've released Women and Pour Some Sugar on Me actually was the fourth. And so the album does okay. It's doing numbers like Pyromania. It's doing 5 million or something like that. So it was doing okay. Then they released Pour Some Sugar on Me. That's the fourth single. Wowie. They did 500,000 in one day. Wow. In one day. And from that point,
yeah, there was a strip bar in Florida that was playing it, right? Phil Collins told that story. And they started playing it locally at the station there. And then it took off.
Yep.
That's the old school FM rock radio days. I love those stories. So yeah, you have the album eventually topped the charts in both the US and UK, sold over 20 million copies worldwide, 7 hit singles, Animal, Women, Pour Some Sugar on Me, the title track, Armageddon It, the number 1 single, Love Bites, and Rocket. It's insane. I know New Jersey rivaled that, I think, around that same time. I mean, those two albums, I remember those being like neck and neck.
Right.
Yeah. The 7 hit singles was the goal because Thriller had 7 singles, right? That was
right.
Goal.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's amazing. Now, but once again, tragedy. So you devote another interim chapter to another moment in Def Leppard history that's tragic. Steve Clark's passing, that was a pivotal moment in Def Leppard history beyond being an incredible guitarist. What do you think the band lost creatively when they lost Steve?
I think the band lost a lot. I've talked about the musical dynamic between Steve and Phil, which was a defining characteristic of Leppard. It just, I mean, that made them, that back and forth and that the difference between the two. I love Viv Campbell, and he is actually a better guitarist in almost every way than Steve Clark was, but he did not have that wildness, that spark that Steve Clark had. And I think that once they lost that, they would never return to what they were. I think they became other great things, but they could not be the Leppard that they had been without him. And I think that they stopped being the Leppard we remember from the 80s when he died.
Find the Booked on Rock website at bookedonrock.com. There you can find all the back episodes of the show, the latest episode in video and audio, links to all of the platforms where you can listen to the podcast, plus all the social media platforms. We're on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. Also, check out the Booked on Rock blog, find your local independent bookstore, find out all the latest hot rock book releases, and before you go, check out the Booked on Rock online store. Pick up some Booked on Rock merch. It's all at bookedonrock.com. Adrenalize was intended for Steve Clark to play on 1992's Adrenalize, and he dies during the making of the album. So Phil Collins plays all of Steve Clark's parts on the album, right?
Yeah. And most people can't really tell because they're not really tuned into it. Really, it's the live Leppard where it really jumps out, the difference between the two. And Phil is just a consummate professional. He is a marvelous player, far underrated. He's one of the best. But yeah, he did all of that work, and it was a great album. But it wasn't just that Steve Clark was missing, among the guitars. It was that the songwriting didn't go that extra mile that it had gone with the previous two albums. Now, Mutt Lange contributed, and I think he had a production role on the album. and he wrote on a lot of the tracks, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't Mutt in charge pushing them into new things. And so there really isn't anything new on the album. It does sound like the little brother of Hysteria.
Right. 6 singles from the album. Let's Get Rocked was a big hit. Make Love Like a Man. Have You Ever Needed Someone So Bad? Here we go again with that's Joe Elliott's theme, right? You want the girl, but you can't get her. Stand Up, Kick Love Into Motion, which I love. Heaven Is, great song. Tonight. Those are the 6 singles. You know,
Great singles.
Yeah, to my ears, it's a companion piece to Hysteria. I think everybody would agree. Every fan would agree.
I absolutely agree with you. It's just volume 2 of that album.
On Let's Get Rocked, there's something about the verses there that you described as being Lange sparse, quote unquote, something similar to the song Rock of Ages, right? Talk about that.
You don't have Mutt's influence there. If Mutt had been there, Let's Get Rocked wouldn't have been full of stock phrases, and it wouldn't have been full of word games. Average, ordinary, everyday kid. I mean, you know, these guys have become married with children at this point. You know, that's a really dumb line.
Let's get the rock out of here.
Yeah, let's get the rock out of here. You know, Mutt would not have let them get away with that. I mean, it was a great anthem. Another great story there. My son at this point is 5 years older, but he's still a kid. And I take him to the mall, to the barbershop, and we're sitting there and he's getting his haircut. And over the mall intercom, Let's Get Rocked comes on. Now, I haven't heard the album yet. I haven't heard the track, but instantly I look up and he looks at me, and my son is, that's Def Leppard. Wow, a new Def. And he starts headbanging while the barber is trying to cut his hair.
That's great.
Until the barber says, sir, would you please get control of your son? That's the effect Let's Get Rocked had on my boy. But the thing is that great music on that album. And the guitar work is great, even if there's no Steve Clark. But the songs are B+ songs.
The next album was 96's Slang. Before we get to that, there were a couple. There was the Vault Best Of, I think, right?
Vault Best Of, yeah.
Which included, I think, Two Steps Behind. Is that where that? Oh, yeah. I love that song. I love Two Steps Behind.
Two Steps Behind. There was also a version of that on there was a collection they did.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. It's got The Woman in the Mirror.
The Woman in the Mirror, yeah.
Yep. We'll look it up here, but yeah, it's an electric version.
An electric version, yeah. That's also on that, but Two Steps Behind.
What a song! And it comes at a time when grunge is big, so Def Leppard's still hanging in there, right?
Well, and that's the tragedy, because Steve Clark had just passed. Steve Clark was the grungiest thing about Def Leppard. I mean, Steve Clark was grunge, you know? If he had not died, I think Def Leppard could have done something with Slang. Retroactive is the name of that album.
Yeah.
They could have done something other than Slang that would have fit into the 90s a lot better than Slang did. But Two Steps Behind did give us one of the signature Leppard tracks. I consider it one of their probably top 3 or 4 ballads.
Absolutely.
Two Steps Behind is a masterful song. I saw them at Fenway Park in Boston on their 22 tour. And he came out and did Two Steps Behind on an acoustic guitar. And it was glorious, just glorious. I love that song.
The other one was When Love and Hate Collide, which came off of the Best Of, which is another solid song.
It's a shame that those just popped up intermittently like they did. Both fantastic tracks. So Vault did offer us something other than just a big bucket of Best Of. It did give us some new treats.
Yeah, you could give credit to them on Slang in the sense that they could have easily played it safe, but they made their most adventurous album with 96's Slang. The singles, the title track, Work It Out, All I Want Is Everything, and Breathe a Sigh. Why do you think they felt it was so important to reinvent themselves at this point?
I think part of it was that they didn't know who they were without Steve Clark. I think part of it was they were trying to find a new sound that Viv Campbell fit into. I think part of it was, hair metal had gone away, and they certainly didn't fit in with grunge. They didn't know who they were anymore. And I think that that's obvious on the album, but I also was one of those people who I got Slang and I brought it home and I played it and I was blown away. Now I realize I'm an exception. Most people, thought this just is not Leppard. I didn't feel that way. I love it when a band experiments. I love it when a band tries something new. I love it when a band really goes for it and swings for the fences. And I felt like they did. But the reason the Beatles are the Beatles is because they never did the same album twice. So I was all for Slang, but of course it didn't fly and they had to go back to the drawing board.
But this was Rick Allen's baby, right? I mean, a lot of these songs, if not all of them, were built around beats that he came up with, and they followed his lead.
Yeah, and I was all for that. That's another reason I say this is a band that step by step, they grew closer together and they backed each other even more and more. They were a true family. And that's another example of that family at work.
Yeah, and I remember they would talk about, Def Leppard would talk about people getting in their ears saying you should break up and come back and reunite because that would be great, big comeback story. And Joe Elliott said, no, we are a band. Sorry to use the corny phrase, but all for one, one for all, right? We're going down together on this.
U2 is the same way. Same story. You've got a bunch of kids in the British Isles who in high school, they get together and they form a band and they spend the rest of their lives in that band. It's the same story. And I remember one time The Edge was being interviewed and someone says, well, you're kind of the standout here because you're such a unique player. Have you ever thought about moving on? And he said, why in the world would I do that? I learned how to play guitar to be in this band.
Right.
And I always love that quote. Well, it's the same with Rick Allen. Rick Allen redefined playing the drums so that you could do it with one arm, and the band rallied around him. Why in the world would they not follow his lead? Why would they not give him every opportunity to innovate and take them in a new direction, which I was all for. I loved that album.
With Slang, commercial disappointment. They made that conscious return to their signature sound on 99's Euphoria. Promise was the big single. Great song. But also Paper Sun, Day After Day, great tunes. Goodbye, 21st Century, Sha La 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 Girl, the other singles. And, there's some Mutt Lange on that hit single from the album Promises. How did he contribute? He contributed to that song. How so?
The band had trouble letting go of Mutt for obvious reasons. They were much more sure-footed with him than without him, especially through the 90s. The 90s they were stumbling in the dark, but it wasn't really their fault. The whole industry was stumbling in the dark. Now, Mutt at that time, he had his card was full, and there's no way they were getting him back, and they knew it. But in addition to Promises, which was an outstanding tune and did keep their radio presence up, at least for a while, they also, even though it was the Leppard sound coming back, Paper Sun was just a marvelously innovative track that didn't sound like what they'd done before, and yet it sounded like a Leppard song. And that shows you that they were still doing their best to innovate, still trying new things, even though they had gone back to safer ground.
It's a dark song. It's,
Yeah. Oh, very.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which they didn't do a lot of those.
Right. That riff, but you're right. They didn't do a lot of those, but it worked.
It did. Great song.
Yeah. Now things get pretty interesting here. For the first time in their career, Def Leppard brought in outside songwriters on O2's X, which includes the single Now, 4-letter word, and Long, Long Way to Go. How significant was that decision? And do you think it ultimately helped or hurt the album?
I think it hurt the album. I think it was another instance of their experimenting in ways that I thought were laudable. And, you like a band that experiments. I thought it was a mistake. I have a private theory about why it happened. And I don't have anything to go on just but gut feel. Between Euphoria and X, you've got all kinds of change happening in the personal lives of the Leppards. The late 90s and the early 2000s, across that gap of 3 or 4 years, there were divorces, there were big legal messes, there were, meeting someone new and marrying them right in that space. So you had all this personal turmoil, and a lot of bands thrive on that. I mean, Fleetwood Mac wrote Rumors over that kind of turmoil, but Leppard's not that kind of band. Leppard's a band that's, as you say, all for one and one for all. They're an upbeat, Beatlesque, joy-filled band, but their lives were not at all joy-filled at that particular stretch of time. My theory, and it's just my theory, is that they went dry. They just weren't coming up with enough decent material, and so they felt like, well, let's just see if we can get some help. But that's just me.
No, I think you got to put this at the bottom on the list of best to worst. I want to like the album, and I wanted to like the songs on there. I think Now is decent, but that was the lead single, and I remember hearing that thinking this isn't good. 4-letter word. Okay, long way to go. To be honest with you, I can't even remember how that sounds. I kind of just gave up on it. But
I did too.
Yeah, but again, I'm always all for the artist doing what they feel that is what they're most inspired to do. Now, they paid tribute to the artists who inspired them as teenagers with the next one, 2006's Yeah.
Yeah.
The singles were covers of Badfinger's No Matter What, which is excellent. David Essex, they did Rock On from David Essex and T-Rex, 20th Century Boy. I found it fascinating that they deliberately avoid covering the Beatles, the Stones, Zeppelin, and Queen. Why were those bands essentially off limits?
Well, again, this is just my view of it. I think they were deliberately reliving that part of their boyhood, which would have been the early 70s, where you had David Essex and you had Badfinger. They were revisiting a time. It wasn't so much about choosing particular artists as it was honoring a stretch of their childhood. Now, certainly those other bands existed in that frame, but those were not the songs they were playing when they got together to jam. They were basically big T-Rex fans, big Thin Lizzy fans. They were, David Essex was one of Joe's affectations. He loved David Essex. And so they went with those artists that spoke their childhood. And I think that probably the 4 bands you named were probably too big to be, their childhood friends. And so I think that's why they made those particular choices.
Thanks so much for checking out the Booked on Rock podcast. If you've just found the podcast, welcome. If you've been listening, thank you so much for your support. And make sure you tell a friend, a family member, share on social media, and let people know about Booked on Rock. And if you do like the podcast, make sure you subscribe, give a 5-star review wherever you listen to the Booked on Rock podcast. We're on Amazon, Apple, iHeart, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, and on YouTube Music. You can check out the full episodes on video, along with video highlights from episodes on the Booked on Rock YouTube channel. Find it at Booked on Rock. Thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. I am very curious to get your thoughts on this next album, Songs from the Sparkle Lounge from 2008, because as far as I know, I think I'm the only Def Leppard fan who likes this album.
Oh, I love that
Oh,
album.
good. Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody else, because I always hear people slamming it. I don't, 9 Lives I didn't like, but Come On is a great song. I'm just looking through the track listing now. While I do that, give me your thoughts on.
Well, Come On. It really speaks to that album's vibe, which is, here's what we do really well. Now we're going to give you some of more of the same, but it's not really going to be the same. Come On is total on your feet anthem. And that's what Leppard does best. And at this point in Leppard's career, this is what, 2008, I think it is. They've been out there since the late 70s. And they've been cranking out albums or anthems the whole time. From Rock Brigade on. Anthem, Pour Some Sugar, da-da-da, Let's Get Rocked. Anthem. And is there anything new? Can they possibly come up with something new? Come On. Didn't sound like anything they'd done before, but it wailed. Oh my God. That's what I loved about Sparkle Lounge. It's like, you know what? We're not done. And that's what I heard in that album. And so, you know what? Yeah.
Written, by the way, we haven't mentioned him, written by the way, by bassist Rick Savage. So credit to him.
Yeah.
He wrote that song. And by the way, that title the album title came from, that was like a room when they were on tour. They would call that the room where they go to jam while they're on tour.
Yeah, the Sparkle Lounge. The Sparkle Lounge was what they called their jam room. Yes. I thought that was, well, charming is kind of a sissy word to use in this context, but it is charming, that it's like, that's exactly what a great band would do. They would come up with a name just like that, and they would use it all the time.
Go, great. Come on. We mentioned Cruise Control, Only the Good Die Young.
Yeah.
Come Undone. Yeah, there's some great stuff on there. So I'm glad I'm not alone on that one. Now,
no, it didn't. Those songs did not get the hearing they deserved.
No.
And Leppard has dealt with that a lot, because Leppard is a band that lives in expectations, and the expectations are so huge because they were so huge when they were, that it's hard to escape that. And I that's unfortunate.
That next album, 2015, the self-titled one, marks a return to a much more collaborative songwriting process. Great ones on this: Let's Go, Dangerous, Man Enough, We Belong, where all the members take a turn on vocals. How much did that renewed collaboration contribute to the album's strength?
Well, I think it made the album. I don't think they had anything to prove at that point. And like I said, I was a big fan of Sparkle Lange, but when the Def Leppard album came out, it was like, what do they have left? And the fact was that they had been writing apart, and then they did come back together and collaborate again. And that's what their whole early years were just collaboration. And I think they came up with an awful lot of great stuff because they were choosing to go that direction again. And I think it spilled over into the next album. I think that that was Def Leppard returning to form, truly, because they were not writing alone. They were back together as collaborators.
Yeah, Diamond Star Halos is the next one. 7 years later, sound energetic. They sound inspired rather than nostalgic. The singles are kick, take what you want and fire it up. What do you think fueled that burst of creativity so late in their career?
I thought about that a lot. When I first got Diamond Star, I played the first 3 or 4 songs over and over and over. And I remember thinking, oh, I've waited 15 years to hear this, because it wasn't just really good Leppard. This was Leppard as they had been in their heyday. And yet these sound like fresh songs. And my theory at the time was it's 2023 when this album comes out. And I'm thinking, I bet this is because of COVID. I think these guys were all locked up and cooped up, and all kinds of musicians all over the world have stories to tell about what it was like to be cooped up during COVID. I think that Leppard had to not be Leppard for months and months and months and months, and that just lit a fuse in every single one of the 5 of them. And when they finally did come back together, they had tunes in their heads. They were raring to go. They couldn't wait to get back to it. I think Diamond Star was a COVID album. It was like, at last, we're out again. And that's what we get. And I'm listening like a song like Fire It Up. I was like, wow. I mean, what that song does, it doesn't just revive their kicking sound and their kicking hooks. It dips into their childhood. I think it gives a nod to Argent, which is another one of their early bands, Bad Company. It echoes those bands. This is them sounding like their childhoods again. Yeah. Because that's when Leppard's at its best.
And meanwhile, oh, by the way, the band is touring pretty much every year, if not every other year. And the ticket sales are still great. People go out and see that band, and they give the fans what they want. I think they have a nice balance. A lot of the diehard fans will always say, well, you got to play more of the deeper stuff. But that aside, they know what people want to hear when they go see a show, and they deliver that while at the same time still creating new music to keep themselves inspired and refreshed, and they don't feel like a nostalgia act. And as fans, I love hearing the new stuff. Keep bringing it, whatever you want to do. And then you have your final chapters cover this: the live albums, the compilations, the box sets. So what do you think fans learn from those archival releases that they can't get from the regular studio albums?
We talked about Vault earlier. They don't just put extra tracks on to put extra tracks on. They put some real gems on. And then you've got something like the box set that's 79 to 81, which is a marvelous, marvelous box set. Anyone listening here who hasn't seen that, you won't find it in a store. You'll have to order it. You might have to go out of your way to find a place to order it. But the box set covers those 3 years, the first 3 years as a band, 79 to 81. You get the first 2 albums, which is fine. Most people don't have them. But then you get 3 more albums. You get the EP we talked about. That first EP that they made by themselves with just the 3 tracks, marvelous. And then they've got their early BBC appearances, what they sounded like when they were first out there on stage for the first time. They got one of their live shows from those eras. You hear Leppard at their most jubilant, at their most joyous, at their most reckless young. You know, you hear Steve Clark going absolutely nuts. You hear Pete Willis, you know, just absolutely as melodic as can be. You hear Joe, not quite himself yet because he's still searching for his voice. It's marvelous. And those box sets basically give you assurance that all this came from a very real place. Because as much as Leppard has given us, you know, we got 12 studio albums, we got the live albums, we got all that they've given us, but it comes from a very real place. And the fact that there's so much of it, and that you can still reach out and find more of it if you want, that tells you just how prolific and how talented and how inspired these guys are, even in their 60s.
Yeah. And they're out on the road this summer.
Yep.
And do you know if there's plans for another album? Have they talked about it?
If they've talked about it, I have not heard that. I do know that it's problematic. Viv Campbell isn't well.
Oh yeah.
And it's that they can even be out right now, to me, is good news, because I would not have thought it.
He's battling cancer, right? He's been battling it for a while.
And I think he's in for a rough patch. So the fact that they're going out at all, to me, is marvelous.
But he looks, I've seen clips, so he looks good. He's out there with him.
Yeah, he does look good. I don't know what happens next. I would love it if they do another album, because, as I said, I was thrilled with Diamond Star. That was a marvelous, marvelous album. They've still got it, you know, and I'm sure there's another good album in them, and I would love to hear it if they get around to it.
We'll see. One last question. If somebody asked you why Def Leppard has remained one of the few rock bands from the early 80s that's still selling out arenas around the world, what would your answer be?
Well, part of it is the fact that they do keep trying to reinvent themselves. Maybe not as aggressively as the Beatles or a band like that, but they never stopped trying new things. They never rested on their laurels, but mostly it's that factor we've talked about several times now. These guys are a family. These guys are brothers, and you know, they've never stopped being that. You know, they never turn away from each other. It's all for one and one for all. We don't see that in music. We don't see that in bands. I mean, think of any band you could mention. The Beatles themselves came apart. Van Halen, your T-shirt there. You know, band after band, just could not hang. Yeah, they couldn't hang in there for each other. Def Leppard, they set the standard. They showed the world how to be a band.
The Booked on Rock podcast is part of the Boneless Podcasting Network. If you're a fan of classic rock and classic film like I am, go to boneless.lovable.app to find over 20 great shows there. That's boneless.lovable.app, or just go to bookedonrock.com, the Boneless Podcasting Network. It is what you want it to be. Listen with confidence. Def Leppard, every album, every song. It is out now. Find it through Amazon, through burningshed.com if you're in the UK. And Scott, can people find you online?
You can find me on Amazon.com.
Okay.
Just say Amazon.com, Scott Robinson, Beatles, and you'll find some of my Beatles books.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of Beatles books. Okay, cool. Yeah. For those not watching this episode, Scott's got his Beatles shirt.
Yes.
There you go. This is awesome. And I love that background there, man. That's yes. Like, that reminds me of like the Andy Rooney, you know, the old CBS, right? He's good.
Yes.
He's got a room full of books. I love it. That's beautiful.
Exactly. Yes.
Scott Robinson, thanks so much.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it.
That's it. It's in the books.